The sky at 2 in the morning was torn open by a savage gash of fire. I stood on the asphalt of the Lark parking lot, the night chill seeping through the thin soles of my cheap canvas sneakers straight into my soles. But that cold could not hold back the overwhelming heat before me. The entire west side of the 2-story apartment building was already swallowed in flames, the fire like a mad beast clawing out of the familiar window on the 3rd floor, licking the night sky into a scorched orange. Fire truck sirens still wailed a few blocks away, high-pressure hoses hissing against the tongues of flame, throwing up clouds of white steam that mingled with rolling black smoke into something that looked like the filthy fog of doomsday. I knew that window. Behind that window, my neatly folded nurse uniforms should have been hanging, crisp light blue shirts in the left side of the closet. Next to the name tag I had tossed aside after my last shift, a smudge of alcohol swab residue still on the plastic casing. Behind that window, a second-hand oak desk I had hauled from a thrift store should have stood, a shallow scratch on its lower left corner from when I had bumped it against the doorframe moving in last summer. Behind that window, the ceramic lamp my grandmother had given me should have been glowing. Pale purple lilacs painted on the shade, a pattern she said matched her own wedding chest from her youth. Now all of that was gone. The flames were a greedy mouth, swallowing every object one by one, spitting out only charred debris and acrid smoke that stung the eyes. I could smell the sickly sweet odor of burning plastic, the sour bitter scent of carbonizing wood, and something else I could not name, more like the stench of textiles burned through. Those odors filled my nostrils, clung to the back of my throat, as if a hand were squeezing my windpipe, every breath an effort. A young firefighter in a yellow helmet shouted at me, waving his arm broadly, motioning me to move farther back. I mechanically stepped back 2 paces, my canvas sneakers squelching on a patch of wet ash, a soft, damp feeling underfoot. What had that ash been? The linen cotton curtain I had bought last month. The novel I was halfway through. Or perhaps one of my photographs, that group picture from Grandma's 80th birthday in the old house's yard, she in her deep purple velvet coat, her eyes crinkled into slits as she laughed, me standing behind her with my hands on her shoulders, the sunlight splendid that day, the plane tree leaves rustling in the breeze. I suddenly realized I was trembling. But oddly, I did not feel cold. The heat from the fire warped the air for yards around, baking my cheeks, a fine sheen of sweat breaking on my skin, mixing with the drifting soot to form a sticky layer on my face. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, leaving a grey-black smear. I stared at that smear for several seconds, my mind a blank, as if all emotion had been evaporated by the fire's heat, leaving only a dull, numbed emptiness. A low voice came from my left, carrying a professional steadiness and restraint. I turned and saw a man in a dark grey work jacket striding quickly toward me, a small badge embroidered on his left chest, blurred by the firelight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a long stride that planted each step firmly, like a man used to walking through ruins. As he came closer, I made out his face, early 40s, a strong jaw, a few faint sunspots on his cheekbones, and eyes the color of dark brown, reflecting the leaping flames, giving them a sharp, piercing look. He introduced himself as Todd Morgan, a fire investigation specialist from the county fire department. His voice not loud but very clear, every syllable landing precisely in my ears. He asked if I was Lila Hayes, the tenant of this apartment, and I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The smoke had scraped my throat raw, every swallow a burning sting. He did not offer any "I'm sorry for your loss" or "it will be all right," did not even give me an extra glance, just pulled a black notebook from his inside jacket pocket, flipped it open, pressed his thumb against the paper, and held his pen poised above the blank page. He said he needed to confirm a few basic facts, in a tone that brooked no argument. He asked how long I had lived in the apartment, and I said 3 years, since March of 2023. He asked if the lease was solely in my name or if I had a roommate. No, I lived alone. He asked where I had been tonight, and I said I was working a night shift at the medical center, 2 double shifts in a row, and had gotten a call from my unit manager around 1:45 a.m. that the fire department had notified them about the fire and I needed to come over. I instinctively clutched the thin jacket I was wearing. It had been lent to me by the elderly lady next door, who had fled her unit in only her pajamas and thin socks, shivering like a leaf in the wind, yet she had trembled as she pressed this jacket into my hands and said, "Child, put this on, it's cold out here." Todd noted all of this in his notebook, the scratch of the pen against paper unusually clear in the gaps between the wailing sirens. He wrote quickly, his handwriting probably messy, but I could not see the words, only that he flipped a page, scribbled a few more lines, then closed the notebook and looked up at the still-burning apartment block. His gaze did not sweep the whole building. It fixed precisely on the second-floor window at the third spot on the left, my bedroom, where the metal safe was kept. He suddenly asked if I had ever stored gasoline, high-proof alcohol, or any common accelerants near the safe, his voice lower than before. My heart gave a sharp squeeze. I heard my own voice, calmer than I expected, almost as if I were not answering a life-or-death question, and I said all cleaning supplies and rubbing alcohol were stored in the cabinet under the kitchen sink, on the opposite side of the living room from the bedroom, far away. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. He did not press further, but in that moment, I read something in the flicker of his eyes, that look I had seen countless times in the hospital, the wary alertness of a doctor facing an anomalous lab result, the instinct that the truth might be far more complicated than it appeared. A young officer jogged over, bent close to his ear, and murmured a few words. Todd's eyes went dark, as if the surface of water had suddenly frozen over. He waved the officer away, then turned to me with that familiar, suppressed heaviness. He said I should come to the County Administrative Center's Fire Investigation Office tomorrow at 9 for a full statement, then hesitated a moment and added that I should try to find a safe place to rest tonight. I tried to smile, but my facial muscles were stiff as leather. I said nurses never get a full night's sleep, our lives are always waiting for the next emergency call. He gave a faint, almost smile of his own, then turned back to the blackened ruins. His shoulders were tight, his posture rigid as a bowstring drawn to its limit. I followed his gaze. The fire had subsided somewhat, and firefighters were entering the building to check for hot spots. The second-floor frame was still standing, but most of the roof had collapsed, the exposed beams now charcoal, their edges still smoking. My bedroom was now only a dark, empty hole, like an eye that would never close. I stood there, watching my past crumble into ash, and a thought rose in my mind, terrifyingly clear: this fire was no accident. That thought circled in my head all night, like a moth that would not land. At 3 a.m, the fire crew finally put out the last of the flames, and the site moved into recovery. A social worker led me to a temporary relief tent, where I filled out a few forms and received a card with emergency contact numbers and a small bottle of water. The water was room temperature. I took a couple of swallows, easing the burning in my throat a little, but the smoky, acrid taste still clung to my mouth, impossible to wash away. Outside the tent, firefighters moved back and forth, radios crackling with instructions I could not decipher. The night wind carried the smell of smoke into the tent, flapping the plastic curtains. I sat on a folding chair, staring at my soot-covered canvas sneakers, my mind a jumble of thoughts I could not grasp. Who should I call? That question rolled through my mind again and again. My phone had 23% battery left. On the screen were a few unread messages, condolences from colleagues at work, and one from the elderly neighbor, saying her daughter had picked her up and I should call her anytime if I needed anything. I replied slowly, each word taking a long time to type. Then my thumb hovered over the contact labeled home in my address book, and paused for nearly a minute. I knew that number by heart. I had stored it in every phone I'd owned since I was 16. The first number I always entered when I got a new device. But in the past 10 years, I had dialed it maybe 5 times total. The last time was last Christmas, when I called to wish them a happy holiday. My mother picked up, background noise from the TV playing carols mixed with the laughter of my sister Kayla's children, and my mother said have a nice holiday in under 40 seconds before hanging up. But now, standing in front of a ruin, with no money and not even a change of clothes, I found myself still hoping that behind that number there might be a shred of warmth. I pressed the dial button. The monotone ring sounded 4 times. Each ring stretched long, like grains of sand falling one by one. The night was quiet, the sounds of the fire growing fainter, and I could hear my own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump against my ribs. On the 4th ring, the call connected. My mother Janet's voice came through, thick with sleep, groggy and raspy, asking who it was. I said, "Mom, it's me, Lila." There was a 2-second silence on the other end, then I heard the softest, most impatient sigh. So short it was like a pinprick on a drumhead, barely loud, yet it made me flinch. She said, "Lila, do you know what time it is? 3 in the morning. Calling people in the middle of the night. How old are you? Don't you know better?" I gripped the phone, my nails nearly biting into the plastic case. I took a breath, and the smoke smell filled my nose again, making my eyes sting. I said, "Mom, my apartment burned down. The whole place is gone. I have nothing, nowhere to stay." Her voice rose a notch, but not with the worry or alarm I had hoped for. It was just the irritation of someone dragged from sleep. She asked, "Your apartment? On fire? How did that happen?" I said I didn't know. The fire department was still looking into it. She sighed again, longer this time, her voice dragging lazily, and then she said, "Well, to be honest, Lila, this has nothing to do with our family. You never paid attention to safety, leaving things plugged in, piling stuff everywhere. This is your own fault. Who told you to be so careless?" That sentence hit my chest like a red-hot iron. I opened my mouth but no sound came out. Black ash still clung to my teeth, and when I pressed my lips together, I tasted a bitter, metallic tang. I stood on the asphalt, wet from the fire hoses, cold moisture seeping through my soles, yet I felt none of it. From the other end came my father Mark's indistinct mumble, asking who was calling so late. My mother muttered back, "Lila, her apartment burned down," and he gave a vague, turned over, the mattress springs creaked, and then silence. No follow-up, no worry, not even a "Are you okay?" Then my mother's tone shifted abruptly, all sleepiness gone in an instant, sharp and eager, with a hint of cautious probing. "Lila, what about that stuff, the things Grandma Mabel left you? The deeds to the old house on Sycamore Street, the original will, are all those in your apartment?" A cold chill shot down my spine, a stark contrast to the fire's heat, as if someone had poured ice water down the back of my neck, running all the way to my tailbone. Years of nursing instinct screamed an alarm, sharp and unmistakable. I heard myself say I wasn't sure, there were a lot of things I'd have to check, and then I said, "Mom, the signal is bad here, I'll call you back." Without waiting for her reply, I hung up. As the screen went dark, all strength drained from me. My legs buckled, and I nearly collapsed onto the wet ground. I grabbed the rear bumper of a nearby fire truck, cold metal, rough and biting against my palm. I gasped for air, but every breath was laced with that mix of smoke and chemicals, my lungs feeling full of cement. She did not care about me. She never had. It had always been like this. When I was 9, my sister Kayla got a whole new set of designer sportswear, a pair of limited edition white sneakers, and a red envelope with $50 as pocket money. I received a plain t-shirt that was obviously from the clearance rack, its price sticker still half peeled and wrinkled, stuffed into a used envelope. My mother said Kayla was growing and needed nice clothes, and that I had always been sensible, wore anything well, and never made a fuss. I put on that t-shirt and stood before the living room mirror. The collar was a bit crooked, the seams didn't align, but I said nothing, just nodded and said, "Thank you, Mom, I like it." When I was 15, I ran a high fever of 103.5, lying in my bed in a daze, my forehead burning like iron fresh from a forge. My mother brought me a glass of warm water, touched my forehead, frowned, and said, "You've always had a weak constitution, take better care of yourself," then went to the next room to iron Kayla's school uniform, because Kayla had an event tomorrow and could not wear wrinkled clothes. I lay there holding that glass of now cold water, staring at a thin crack in the ceiling, counting how much longer before the fever would break. When I was 22, I graduated from nursing school with a rank in the top 5% of my class, and excitedly called home to share the news. My mother answered, listened, and said, good. Find a job now," then immediately switched to talking about Kayla's boyfriend's family being well off and their parents already discussing marriage. I stood in the public phone booth on campus, rain pounding the plastic roof, and suddenly realized I had nothing more to say. For more than 20 years, I had been the sensible child, the one who never needed worrying about, never needed help, always able to shoulder everything alone. And they had grown comfortable with that convenience, even coming to regard it as my natural duty. But this time was different. My apartment was gone, all my possessions turned to ash, not even a change of underwear, with only a few $dozen in my pocket and a credit card near its limit. And my mother's first thought was not my welfare but the whereabouts of my grandmother's will. I stood at the edge of the ruins, the night wind blowing soot into my face like fine black rain. On the horizon, a faint grey-white line appeared. Dawn was coming. I made a silent decision, one that felt foreign to me, like a string that had been stretched to its breaking point and finally snapped. In that snap, there was no pain, only a strange, cold clarity. I would not endure it anymore. When daylight came, the fire scene looked even more harrowing. Sunlight streamed from the east, exposing every detail of the wreckage. The second-floor flooring had mostly caved in. The partition walls were reduced to blackened frames, like a skeleton flayed open under the sky. The first floor still held some shape, but the ceiling was gone, huge holes ringed with melted plastic pipes and twisted metal, looking like some grotesque installation art. I stood outside the tape, watching firefighters and investigators move through the debris. Some with metal detectors sweeping the ash, others squatting with small shovels to dig out compacted char, still others with cameras documenting every angle. Todd Morgan was among them, now in a dark blue coverall, heavy gloves, and goggles, crouched near the spot where my bedroom used to be, using a long metal probe to carefully sift through the pile. Sunlight caught his sweat-damp profile. He was focused, lips pressed together, occasionally pausing to retrieve a small object with tweezers, seal it in a clear evidence bag, label it, then resume his methodical search. His movements were slow and steady, like a surgeon performing a delicate procedure. I watched from outside the barrier for nearly an hour, and he never once looked up in my direction. At 9 a.m, following his instruction from the night before, I went to the third floor of the County Administrative Center to the Fire Investigation Office. It was a modest room, walls painted light gray, with a row of steel filing cabinets labeled with various tags. Todd was already there, out of his coverall, back in the gray work jacket, with a recording device and a fresh notepad on the desk. He gestured to the chair opposite me, as curt as before. I sat down. The seat was hard, the cushion almost non-existent. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting parallel stripes of light on the desk. He switched on the recorder, red indicator glowing, announced the date, time, case number, and my name into the microphone, then looked up at me. He asked me to describe, as thoroughly as possible, who had access to my apartment in the past 2 weeks, whether anyone other than me had a key, or if I had ever lent one out. His tone was neutral, but I noticed he emphasized the word key, as if marking a crucial point. I thought for a moment and said I had only 2 keys. One I carried, and the other I kept under the doormat outside the apartment, a habit I'd developed because night shifts often kept me late and I'd sometimes forgotten my keys at work. He asked how long I had done that. About 1.5 years. Could I be sure the spare had always been there? Yes, I always lifted the mat to wipe the dust when I cleaned, and the key was always there. He wrote a few more lines, then set down the pen, folded his hands, and fixed me with a more intense look. He asked if anyone had recently observed this habit, someone who might have seen me retrieve the key. I was taken aback. The question was pointed. I said my sister Kayla Hayes had stayed with me for a weekend last summer with her 2 children, and she would have seen me take the key from under the mat when I went to work. I paused, then added that my mother also knew, because last November I had asked her to water my plants while I was away, and I had told her where the key was over the phone. I gave up both my mother and my sister without hesitation. I felt no qualms about washing dirty linen in public. The 3A.M. call had shredded the last of my sentiment. I just wanted the truth out, whatever it cost. Todd nodded, noted those details, then sat back, capped his pen, and said we would stop there, thanking me for my cooperation, and promising to keep me informed of any developments. I stood to leave, but at the door he called me back. I turned, he hesitated, as if choosing his words, then said the preliminary scene analysis had come in. The point of origin was very clearly the corner where my metal safe was kept, with burn patterns significantly heavier than the surrounding area, and they had detected accelerant residues in the ash. Preliminary findings indicated this was not an accident. He bent back to his equipment, not looking at me, as if merely reporting the weather. I stood in the doorway, my heart slamming against my ribs, and then, oddly, I grew calm. Of course. I had known it. Walking out of the administrative center, the sunlight blazed on the asphalt, the glare painful. I squinted at the sky, a September blue, utterly cloudless, like a vast glass dome. Traffic moved, people hurried past. No one knew that a woman's world had just been incinerated, or that the fire might have been lit by her own family. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, my canvas shoes rubbing against my heels. The wet-than-air-dried shoes had stiffened, chafing with every step. I passed a breakfast shop, steam and the smell of fried eggs and toast wafting out. My stomach gave a sharp cramp, reminding me I had not eaten since yesterday evening. But I did not go in. I had only a few $dozen in my pocket, every cent was precious now. I ducked into a convenience store next door, bought the cheapest bottled water and a pack of crackers, and ate two by the trash can outside, washing them down. The crackers were dry, crumbs sticking to my lips. I rinsed with water, swallowed, and tucked the rest into my jacket pocket. I must have looked a fright, hair disheveled, yesterday's soot still on my face, jacket wrinkled, the collar of my t-shirt stained yellow from water and smoke. Passers-by glanced briefly, then looked away. There were too many homeless people in this city for anyone to spare a second look at a woman covered in ash. I walked along Highway 9 for nearly 40 minutes before I found the cheap motel. Its neon sign was missing 2 letters, making it illegible. At the front desk, a grey-haired woman gave me a look of mixed wariness and sympathy. I asked for the cheapest single room for 3 nights. She checked the registry, quoted a price. When I handed over my credit card, she hesitated, looking at my grimy fingers, then swiped it. The room was at the end of the second-floor corridor. The lock was old, the key needed a hard twist. Pushing open the door, a wave of odors, carpet cleaner, cheap air freshener, and mildew assaulted me, so thick it almost seemed visible. I stood at the threshold for a moment to adjust, then stepped in. The room was tiny. A double bed took up most of the space, a crooked lamp on the nightstand with a burn mark on the shade. The carpet was dark brown, its stains invisible, but my feet felt hard, crusty patches. The curtains were synthetic and rattled when pulled, filtering little light. I locked the door, put the chain on, and wedged a chair under the handle. Then I sat on the bed, staring at a thin crack on the opposite wall. After about 5 minutes, I felt wetness on my face. I touched it. Tears. They flowed silently, soundlessly, without any evident emotion, just spilling from my eyes and streaking down my cheeks, dripping onto the front of my jacket, leaving dark spots on the grey fabric. I sat on that lumpy mattress, hands folded in my lap, back straight, crying without a sound. I cried for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I got up, went into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and washed my face with cold water. The woman in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Pale, red-rimmed eyes, lingering smudges of soot on her forehead and cheekbones. I leaned in close, meeting her eyes. The pupil reflected the fluorescent light, painfully bright. I said to the mirror, "You're going to be okay." My voice was quiet, but in that small sealed space, it sounded surprisingly clear. "You've made it through everything before. This time is no different." With that, I dried my face, stepped out, and began to plan my next moves. First, contact my lawyer, Clara Fowler. She had handled Grandma's entire will process and knew where all the backups were. I needed to confirm they were intact and, if the original was destroyed, whether there were legal alternatives. Second, I needed a temporary place to stay. This motel was only good for a few days, my credit limit was low, and rent deposits were a problem. I would have to ask the hospital for an emergency salary advance. Third, and most critical, I had to figure out exactly what my family was after. Why were they so desperate to know if the will documents were destroyed? The estate settlement was still months away. What was the rush? Unless they knew the court hearing was approaching faster than I thought. I picked up my phone and dialed Clara Fowler's office. The phone rang 5 times before Clara herself answered. Her voice was as crisp as ever, no small talk. After I told her about the fire, she fell silent for about 3 seconds. I could almost picture her behind her big desk, leather chair, folders spread out, absently tapping her index finger on the desk, frowning slightly as she mentally ran through legal options. She asked if the original will was in the metal safe in my apartment. Yes, along with the property deeds and deposit certificates. What about copies? Did I have any duplicates? I took a breath and said, "You remember when Grandma came to your office that last time? We made 3 notarized copies. One went to the bank safe deposit box, one I brought back to my apartment. That one is probably gone too. But there's a third. Grandma insisted I keep a copy in the secret compartment in the living room of her old house." I heard a soft rustling on the line, Clara probably flipping through her files. She confirmed that she remembered. Grandma had specifically instructed her about the compartment's opening mechanism and had required that the instructions be written on a separate piece of paper, sealed, and kept apart from the will itself. I told her I had that note with me. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim plastic card holder. Along with a credit card, there was a folded slip of paper, yellowed at the edges but the handwriting clear, Grandma's fine, thin script detailing how to open the compartment. I carried it because Grandma had insisted, before she died, that the note never be stored with the copy, so that if anything happened to the house, I could still retrieve it. Clara's tone lightened. She said I should come to her office that afternoon, and she would gather all the notarized documents, video evidence, and supplementary materials. Then we would go to the old house and retrieve that copy. I agreed. She lowered her voice and asked if I had spoken to my family about the will recently. I gripped the phone tighter, my thumbnail pressing a pale dent into the plastic. I told her about the call from my mother, who had not asked about my safety but only about the inheritance papers. Clara was quiet for a moment, then gave a soft, suppressed sigh. She said she understood, and then informed me that Janet and Kayla had both called her office the previous week. Janet had claimed Grandma was not of sound mind when she made the will and demanded the mental capacity assessment. Kayla had floated the idea of a settlement before the hearing, on the condition that I agreed to split the property. My back went cold again. I said they had never mentioned any of this to me. I had not seen them since Grandma's funeral. Clara explained that they were trying to bypass me and apply pressure, a classic tactic. Isolate the main heir, create an information gap, and use that to force a concession. But since I had all the legal evidence and witnesses, their arguments would not hold up. The only remaining issue was the original. If we could prove it had been intentionally destroyed, that would elevate the case beyond civil matters. My heart lurched. I asked what she meant. She said gently, "One step at a time. We'll retrieve the backup, then I'll petition the court to include the fire scene evidence. See you at 2. After hanging up, I sat on the bed for a while. Sunlight filtered through the dingy curtains, casting a warm haze on the brown carpet. The air still smelled unpleasant, but I was starting to get used to it, and the burning in my lungs had eased. I checked my phone. I sent a message to the hospital's HR department, briefly explained my situation, and asked if I could get an advance on 2 weeks' pay. Then I leaned back on the mattress and closed my eyes, and images of Grandma in her final months came unbidden. She sat in the old rattan chair in the living room, a light grey wool blanket over her knees, a half-filled cup of water in her hands. Her fingers were swollen and twisted from rheumatoid arthritis, making it hard to hold the cup. She had to grip it tightly with her thumb and forefinger, but she refused to use those non-spill cups with straws. She said she was not a baby and would not be seen with such things. Every day after work, at 3 in the afternoon, I would drive 20 minutes to Sycamore Street, have dinner with her, help her bathe, change her dressings, and organize her medications for the next day. Her medication list filled a whole page: blood pressure, diabetes, kidney function, arthritis, and sleeping pills. I had the timing and dosages memorized and sorted them in color-coded pill boxes, each slot labeled with large stickers so she could manage during the day. But she still got confused. Once, I found she had taken her evening blood pressure pill as the morning anti-inflammatory, and she was slumped on the arm of the couch, dazed, with a bit of drool at the corner of her mouth. I panicked, took her blood pressure, dangerously low. I helped her lie flat, wrapped her in the blanket, and watched her for 2 solid hours until her pressure climbed back to safe levels. When she woke and saw me, her clouded eyes suddenly filled with tears, and she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Her voice was soft, like the rustle of dry leaves in the autumn wind. "Lila, all these years, you're the only real one." I held her hand, my nose burning, but I held back the tears. I said, "This is my job, taking care of patients, don't give it a second thought." She laughed, the wrinkles around her mouth deepening into a sly, loving expression. "You come here on your days off, you spend every weekend with me, call that a job? Nonsense. You're not like your mother, Lila, and not like your sister. You're soft-hearted, but solid, no pretense." I looked down, pretending to get her more water, hiding the tears in my eyes. Back then, I had no idea she was secretly revising her will. She mentioned seeing Clara a few times, and I thought it was about tax issues or property transfer paperwork. But 6 weeks before she died, she insisted I take a day off and drive her to Clara's office. We waited in the reception area for nearly 20 minutes. Grandma wore her favorite maroon sweater, with small white daisies embroidered on the collar, cuffs worn thin. Her hair was neatly combed and pinned behind her ears with a black clip, and she looked more energetic than usual. Yet her grip on my hand was tight, her palm dry and warm, and I sensed a nervousness I rarely saw in her. Clara came out, took Grandma into the inner office, and closed the door. I sat alone in the waiting room, flipping through legal magazines, feeling a vague premonition I could not name. That evening, as we left the lawyer's office, Grandma sat in the passenger seat, her profile lit by the setting sun. She turned to me seriously and said, "Lila, I have to arrange some things for you. Your mother, your father, your sister, I know what they're after. I've been holding my tongue, but I need to do what's right." I kept my eyes on the road and just said I knew better than to push, she would tell me when she was ready. 3 days before she died, her mind was wandering, most of the time asleep. But one afternoon she suddenly became lucid, her eyes bright, and she held my hand and rambled on about her youth, about summers the first spent at her house, and about the pomegranate tree she had planted behind the old house. Then she reached under her pillow and produced an envelope containing the slip of paper with the compartment instructions. She pressed it into my hand and told me to keep it on me, saying, "Don't open it until I'm gone. And remember, only you can open it." I nodded and tucked the envelope into my inner pocket. That night I stayed by her bedside, holding her hand, watching her drift back to sleep, her breathing shallow and light, chest rising and falling faintly, brow smooth, like an untroubled child. 2 mornings later, she passed quietly in her sleep. I sat in her room, listening to the flat line of the heart monitor, still holding her hand. The warmth was fading, the tiny pulse beneath the skin gone, joints stiffening, but I would not let go, as if letting go would mean she was truly gone. When the orderly came to gently pry my fingers loose, I realized my tears had soaked the front of my uniform. My knees buckled as I stood, and I gripped the bedrail to steady myself. Outside, the sky was just lightening, new leaves on the plane trees swaying in the morning breeze. I suddenly understood that the only person who had ever truly loved me was gone. But I had little time to mourn. There were arrangements to make, the house to manage, her belongings to sort, and the note she had given me. I had to follow her wishes. I had no idea then that Grandma had left me a battlefield, and I was only a raw recruit at its edge. Now, looking back, I realized she had foreseen everything. She knew that after her death, the family would tear each other apart for the inheritance, so she laid out multiple safeguards, notarized copies, a hidden compartment, a separate bank safe deposit box, digital scans encrypted. She knew their greed and ruthlessness better than I did, so she scattered evidence everywhere, ensuring that if one thread was cut, another would remain. I sat on the motel bed and unfolded the note again. Grandma's handwriting was shaky, her fingers must have been hurting, the characters crooked but each one legible. Pull the third brick to the right of the living room fireplace, not from the center, but slightly above and to the right, it's loose. Don't pull it out, push it inward 1/2 inch, then slide it sideways. The compartment is about 1 foot behind the brick layer, opening upward, reachable by touch. I refolded the note, tucked it back into my card holder, and placed it in my jacket pocket. At 1:15 p.m., I left the motel and took a taxi to Clara's office. Clara Fowler's office was on the 4th floor of a light grey brick building downtown, with south-facing windows that let in bright afternoon sun. Her desk was adorned with a lush pothose plant, its vines trailing over the edge of the pot and winding along the bookcase to the top of the filing cabinet, adding a splash of green to the legal documents and case files. When I arrived, she was on the phone. She waved me to a seat. I sank into the leather chair opposite her, soft, a world apart from the motel's hard mattress. I leaned back, idly scanning the titles on her shelves: real estate law, inheritance law, civil procedure. One volume on family property disputes was dog-eared and full of colored sticky notes. Clara hung up and pulled a thick manila folder from her drawer, sliding it across the desk to me. She said it contained the complete records from the day Grandma made her will, a backup USB with video footage, notarized witness statements, and a signed declaration of mental capacity from an independent physician, certifying that Grandma was of sound mind and fully capable of making her own decisions. Together, these would refute any claims of incompetence or undue influence. She spread the documents out for me to see. I glanced through them. More than a dozen pages of notary signatures and medical evaluations alone. Every step had third-party witnesses and followed legal procedure. Grandma had always been meticulous, and seeing the black and white evidence still gave me a warm feeling in my chest. She said, "Let's go," and stood to grab her coat. We would go to the old house and retrieve the copy. Sycamore Street was in the old neighborhood, surrounded by similar vintage houses with red brick, black tile roofs, and front porches with various flowers and shrubs. Grandma's house was the plainest of them all, a modest yard, neatly kept. The patch of lawn near the entrance was lush green every summer, and Grandma loved to sit on the porch and gaze at it. Now, unkempt for a while, the grass had gone wild, weeds mingling with the fine blades, a mottled look from a distance. I used the old key Grandma had given me to open the front door. The lock was rusty, and I had to twist it hard. The door gave a long creak, releasing a smell of aged wood, dust, and old cotton fabrics. The house was bright. The south-facing living room windows were uncovered, flooding the wood floors with afternoon light. Furniture was draped in white dust covers, a thin layer of dust settling on them after a month of vacancy. Clara followed me in, scanned the room, and her eyes landed on the brick fireplace. She asked if the compartment was on the right side. I said yes, knelt down, and ran my hand over the right side of the fireplace wall. The bricks were dark red, rough, the mortar between them cracked with age. Following Grandma's instructions, I counted the third brick from the right, placed my hand slightly above the center, and gave a gentle push. Nothing. I tried again, adding a little force. I felt a faint give, but the brick was wedged tight, as if held by some sticky substance. I adjusted my angle, pressed my palm against the top edge, and while sliding sideways, pushed inward, a soft click, and the brick moved back half an inch, revealing a narrow gap. I hooked my fingernail into the gap and slowly pulled the brick completely out. It was lighter than I expected, the back hollowed out to form a small handle. Behind it was a cavity about a foot deep, smoothly finished. I reached in and touched a cold metal surface, a flat, rectangular tin box. I lifted it out and set it on the mantel. The box was small, about the size of a hardcover book, painted with matte black lacquer, and sealed with a strip of blue tape bearing the handwritten label, "LH, will copy." I opened it. Inside lay a sealed transparent document bag containing the will copy, crisp and clean, fold lines sharp, with red notary stamps across several pages. I carefully leafed through, confirming every page was present, pagination continuous, seals intact. Clara nodded, her expression relaxing. She said that although the original was likely destroyed, this copy, combined with our full set of notarized materials and video evidence, would hold up legally. But there was one issue we needed to consider. What was that? She said if my family saw me produce this complete copy, they would immediately realize their arson had failed and the will was still intact. Their reactions could be one of several. First, admit defeat and back off. Second, create new problems, like challenging the copy's validity, claiming it was forged or fabricated later. Third. She trailed off, but the unspoken option hung heavy in the air. The third option, they might take even more extreme measures. I did not respond, simply closed the box and placed it carefully into Clara's briefcase. Then I stood, brushed off my knees, and walked to the south-facing window, gazing at the lawn and the quiet street beyond. The neighborhood was peaceful. Few cars passed, their tires humming on the asphalt. The pomegranate tree still stood in the yard, its branches bearing sparse fruit, small and dark red in the afternoon light. I remembered autumns when Grandma would pick pomegranates for me. She would sit on a low stool under the tree, holding a tin basin, and snip each fruit with her scissors, careful not to bruise the skin. I would squat beside her, sometimes reaching out to take the one she handed me, my palms too small to hold more than 2 at a time. She always saved the largest ones for me, saying, "Big ones have more seeds and are sweeter," while she ate the smaller, bruised ones herself. Clara's voice came from behind, "Are you all right?" I turned and gave her a smile, one I knew was forced, awkward. I said I was fine, just remembering my childhood. I walked back to the center of the room, dusted off my hands, and told her we should keep these things in her office for safekeeping. I would not tell them about the copy yet. I'd wait for the fire investigation results. If they really had, I paused, biting off the word, started the fire, then when they thought they had destroyed all evidence, we would still hold the complete backup and notarized papers, which would make them drop their guard and reveal more. Clara gave me a long look, a flicker of approval in her eyes. She said my thinking was sound, and we would follow that plan. Keep quiet, wait for the investigation, and act only when the evidence chain was complete. We left the house as the sun was painting the sky orange. I locked the door, pocketed the key, and stood on the porch for one last look at the old house. The red brick glowed warmly in the slanting light, window glass reflecting the clouds above, the overgrown lawn slightly wilted, the air filled with earth and dried grass. I did not know if the house would ever truly be mine, but I knew that Grandma had given it to me with all her trust and love. That trust was too heavy to fail. Back at the motel, almost 6 o'clock, the familiar smell greeted me as I opened the door, but I no longer minded. I hung up my jacket, put my phone on the nightstand to charge, and sat on the bed to check messages. HR had approved the emergency pay advance. It would be in my account by tomorrow. A colleague offered to help find a short-term sublet, reasonable rent, available by the end of the month. And there was a message from an unknown number. I read it twice before realizing who it was. Todd Morgan, Ms. Hayes, we have new findings from the scene. Please come to the office tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a follow-up interview. Also, bring an item you've touched frequently, like a hairbrush or well-worn clothing, for reference testing. I stared at that message for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. That vague phrase reference testing made me guess the purpose, to compare residue or DNA, cross-checking the accelerant or suspicious items found in the fire with my personal effects. I put the phone aside and flopped onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling crack. It ran from the light fixture to the corner like a thin black river. Following its path, my mind wandered to another question. If Kayla had indeed stolen my spare key last summer, when exactly had she done it? That weekend, I worked days and came home at night. She stayed with her children in the living room, with plenty of opportunity to act alone. I had not suspected a thing. She acted normally, even cooked a couple of meals and did the dishes, which had surprised me. I'd even mentioned to a coworker how unusually helpful she was, and my coworker laughed that blood was thicker than water. Now I realized, that meal, those dishes, all came with a cost. Every ounce of kindness hid an ounce of calculation, and I had accepted it without question, even feeling grateful. How naive. Then another thought struck, making my heart clench. If Kayla had copied the key last summer, why had she waited nearly a year to use it? What had happened in between to push her to act? Grandma's will. Grandma had revised her will last November, and once the notarization was complete, the lawyer notified all heirs. That meant from the moment Kayla learned the house was left solely to me, she had been planning how to use that key. And all that time, I had kept the spare under the mat, oblivious. I closed my eyes, my hand on my forehead, feeling my heart pound under my palm. The deep ache in my lungs remained, a remnant of smoke that would take days to clear. But my mind was sharp, every detail fixed like a nail in memory, impossible to pull out. Tomorrow, I would tell Todd everything, the missing key, the probing phone calls, the lawyer bypassing pressure. Combined with the physical evidence, it would form a complete picture. I picked up my phone and sent a brief reply, "I'll be there at 10 a.m. Thank you." Then I turned off the light, lay in the dark, listening to the occasional car pass, and slowly fell asleep. That night, I did not dream. At 9:50 the next morning, I arrived at the county office. Todd was already there, laptop open, displaying close-up photos of the fire debris I'd seen before. He motioned me to sit and swiveled the screen toward me. He showed me a high-resolution image of the floor near the safe, about a foot to the left. In the ash pile was an irregular shape, like the imprint of a liquid spill that had burned, with distinct spread marks contrasting with the evenly charred surrounding area. He explained that this was the residue pattern of the accelerant recovered from the bedroom floor. The main component was standard gasoline, but mixed with small amounts of industrial alcohol and a common paint thinner. The mixture burned faster and ignited at a lower temperature, rapidly raising the heat and accelerating carbonization of nearby materials. A classic accelerated arson pattern. Someone had poured the mixture at specific spots and ignited it. I stared at the photo, my chest ached, but my face remained composed. I asked if that was the safe's location. He said yes, roughly an arm's length in front of it. He flipped to another angle, showing the thickness and spread of the ash. The accelerant was concentrated in front of the safe, clearly targeting it. The intent was to burn the contents quickly, not merely to destroy the structure. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears, but I kept my breathing steady. In my mind, I matched the photo to my apartment layout. The safe was in the southeast corner of the bedroom, facing the window, the same window from which I'd first seen the fire erupt. The arsonist had poured the accelerant there to ensure the flames immediately consumed the safe's contents before spreading to the shelves and closet. He continued, saying they had found suspicious traces, a small wiped area on the inner edge of the bedroom door, cleaner than the surroundings, suggesting someone had wiped it with cloth. The evidence was incomplete, but he leaned toward intentional cleaning because it was right near the doorknob, a logical spot to erase fingerprints after setting the fire. My own voice was steady when I said, "So the arsonist wiped the doorknob before leaving." He confirmed it, closed the laptop, set aside the notebook and pen, and leaned forward, hands folded. He said he had been on the force for 14 years and had handled many arson cases. Most were random or retaliatory, but this one had distinct markers. First, the target was clearly the safe. Second, the perpetrator knew the layout, could find the safe in the dark. Third, there was deliberate cleanup, all pointing to someone familiar with the place. I said I understood, I had suspects, and I could give him leads. He reopened his notebook, pen poised. I started from the beginning, Kayla's visit last summer, the opportunity to copy the key, the shift in my mother's attitude after the will's reading, their attempts to bypass me and pressure my lawyer, the suspicious phone calls on the night of the fire, and the records I had kept. Todd took detailed notes, occasionally clarifying a date or detail. His handwriting was messy but thorough, and he sometimes paused to tap his pen on the page, as if organizing his thoughts. He said that key comparison and fingerprint analysis would take time, but he would expedite it. He also asked if I could email him the call recordings. Digital evidence would strengthen the chain. I agreed, wrote my email on a sticky note, then hesitated and asked the question that had been stuck in my throat. If the evidence ultimately pointed to my family, what would happen? He met my eyes, with no ambiguity. He said that given the severity, deliberate arson, destruction of property, possible fabrication of a fire scene to cover up a crime, these were felony charges. If proven, the case would be handed to the prosecution for decisions. He spoke gently, but the meaning was clear. We shook hands. His palms were cool and rough from handling construction debris and metal components. I thanked him and left, my steps lighter but the weight still on my chest, just slightly eased. The following week took on a strange, suspended quality. During the day, I worked at the hospital in my crisp blue uniform, moving between rooms, turning patients, administering meds, changing dressings, recording vitals. One of my patients was a man in his 70s, terminal pancreatic cancer spread to liver and lungs. He slept most of the time, and when awake he could only mumble. His wife sat by his bedside from 8 in the morning until 8 at night, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes just watching him with that deep, abysmal grief I had seen so often. Every time I entered that room, the old lady would nod and say softly, "Nurse, you're here." I'd smile back, then adjust his pillow, check the IV, take his temperature and blood pressure, and note everything on the chart. She watched quietly, and after I finished, she would add, "Thank you for your trouble," her voice barely above a whisper. In the 2 weeks I had been assigned to that room, we had exchanged fewer than 20 sentences. Yet that wordless comfort anchored me. In a world where people left at any moment, something constant was more reassuring than any words. The fire had become a topic of quiet gossip among my colleagues. Some would pull me aside and offer help, a place to stay, meals, whatever. I declined each time, saying the hospital had already arranged temporary housing. They saw my calm demeanor and didn't push, though a few extra glances followed me down the hallways. I didn't blame them. Everyone knew what it meant to lose everything in a fire, and what it took for a single woman with a strained family to face it. But their kindness only made me want to show less weakness. I was used to shouldering things alone. That habit was carved into my bones. The short-term rental went smoothly. With the pay advance, I paid the first month's rent and deposit, and got a new key. The apartment was in a quiet neighborhood in the West End. 3rd floor, 1 bedroom, 1 living room, old but clean furniture. On moving day, I dragged my single suitcase, holding the few clothes and toiletries my co-workers had given me, into the empty living room and stood staring out the window at a tree I didn't know. Sunlight was bright, leaves half yellow, shaking in the wind. The tree was tall, its branches almost reaching the balcony across the way. I stood there a long time, feeling a surreal sense of distance. 2 weeks ago, I had been living my normal life. Morning coffee, watering plants, reading before bed. Those mundane routines now seemed like memories from a past life. The space that had been mine was now a heap of charcoal and twisted metal. My plants, my books, my clothes, my 10 years of savings, the antique jewelry Grandma had passed to me. Every material thing that made up Lila Hayes was reduced to ash. Yet I was still standing. Unbroken. That night, I lay in bed staring at the clean white ceiling, the lampshade a new white plastic reflecting the streetlight outside. I organized my thoughts. The hearing was in 45 days. Clara had all the evidence ready. Once the court confirmed the copy, the house would be transferred. Before that, I had to stay safe. If my family knew I had a backup, they might try something more extreme. Todd's forensic results were still pending. Fingerprints, residues, cleaning marks. I told myself not to rush, but each night the fire's image replayed, and my mother's sigh echoed in my mind. I slept lightly, often waking at dawn and staring at the tree's shadow for a long while before closing my eyes again. On Thursday of the 2nd week, I got a text from Kayla. It was warm and considerate, with perfect punctuation and a little red heart emoji. "Lila, Mom and Dad asked me to check on you. Heard you moved. We could come by and bring you some food. Don't starve yourself." I stared at that heart and felt a wave of nausea. I knew this tactic well. After pushing and cold-shouldering me, one of them would suddenly show up with soft, gentle concern, as if all the past harshness had never happened, as if I should be grateful for their condescension. I replied briefly, "Thanks, I've been busy. No need for now." I put the phone face down. Within 5 minutes, another message. "Oh, don't be silly. We'll just drop by for a little while. We're really worried about you. You've been dealing with this alone." Another gentle knife, coated with honey. I took a deep breath, flipped the phone over, and read it again. Then a thought occurred. Why avoid them? Let them come. Let them see me unharmed. Let them guess what I had and what I didn't. I replied, "Okay, Friday evening after 7. I'll send my address." I sent the new address, put down the phone, and leaned back. Outside, the sky was darkening, streetlights casting orange glow, elongating the tree's shadow. Friday at just past 7, the doorbell rang. Before opening, I checked my phone's recording app. Then I turned the knob. The hallway light was broken. In the dimness stood 2 figures, Kayla in a cream-white knit cardigan, hair in a loose bun, wearing a standard caring smile. Behind her, my brother-in-law Derek, carrying a supermarket plastic bag. Kayla threw her arms around me in a tight hug. Her body was warm, and her familiar floral shampoo smell filled my nose. "You've lost weight. Your face is thinner. You haven't been eating, have you?" Her chin rested on my shoulder, her tone dripping with concern. I let her hold me for 2 seconds, then stepped back and motioned them in. "Come in, slippers are in the closet, help yourselves." Kayla changed her shoes naturally, bending to reveal a faint white scar on her calf from a bike accident as a teenager. Derek followed silently, set the plastic bag on the coffee table, its mouth open to reveal several takeout boxes and a bag of fruit. Kayla sat on the sofa, patted the spot next to her, and said, "I brought braised ribs and your favorite garlic broccoli, plus blueberries. Derek got them from that restaurant you used to like. Eat while it's warm." I pulled out a chair at the dining table instead of sitting beside her. "Thanks, I'll eat later. Can I get you something to drink?" No, we'll just sit a minute. The kids are at Mom and Dad's." She waved a hand, but her eyes were scanning the room, from the living room to the half-open bedroom door, then to the kitchen, finally stopping on the canvas bag on the armchair. She lingered there 2 or 3 seconds, then looked away, her smile intact. I watched her subtle movements. She seemed relaxed, but her right index finger kept rubbing her thumb, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. She casually asked about my insurance claim, wondering what I would do with the payout. I said I hadn't decided yet. The current place was fine for now. She nodded, her smile still fixed, but a shadow passed through her eyes. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Lila, there's something I want to discuss with you. Don't take it the wrong way. It's about Grandma's will. The court hearing is coming up, right? Mom and Dad think we should try to resolve it privately instead of fighting in court. You know Dad's blood pressure is bad. Stress triggers it. I was thinking maybe we could talk and find a compromise, so we don't have to go that far." I looked at her without speaking. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. Her eyes met mine for a couple of seconds, then shifted away and back. The corners of her smile tightened a fraction. She added, "I'm saying this for your own good. It's hard for you out here alone, and if family could help, wouldn't it be easier? The old house is the foundation of our family. Keeping it all to yourself would be a heavy burden." The knife again, wrapped in words like "for your own good," "family," "support." The blade was hidden deep, but a gentle prick would be deadly. I did not respond. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank slowly with my back to her, letting the silence stretch until it almost broke. Then I put down the glass, turned, and said in the calmest tone possible, "Kayla, the lawyer is handling the hearing. We'll follow the process. Grandma's will is clear and legal. We've all had an education, we know what the law says. I don't want to make things ugly, either. But if we're going to talk privately, I need a concrete proposal. Do you want half the property, a cash settlement? You have to tell me what you're asking for, or I can't negotiate." A tiny crack appeared in Kayla's expression. She had clearly expected me to be emotional, to whine, to retreat, and then to cave under pressure. But I did none of that. I stood at the kitchen entrance, glass in hand, watching her, waiting. She faltered, "I don't really know exactly what would be fair. Mom and Dad just thought we could all sit down and hear your thoughts." "Fine," I said. "Let's wait until the fire investigation is complete. There are too many unknowns right now, and we shouldn't negotiate blindly. If new facts come out, it could change things." When I said fire investigation, her right index finger twitched, pressing and rubbing against her thumb. She dropped her gaze for a moment, then looked up with her perfect smile restored. "Okay, we'll wait. Don't let us keep you, we'll go now. Remember to eat the food while it's hot." She rose faster than before, eager to leave. Derek followed, silently picking up the now empty plastic bag. At the door, after she put her shoes on, Kayla turned and gave me a look that was brief but chilling. No more fake warmth, just that cold, appraising expression I'd seen too many times at Grandma's bedside, measuring something's value and fragility. "Take care of yourself," she said flatly, without a smile. "Lock your doors at night. This old neighborhood can be unsafe." Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the concrete hallway, growing fainter until the elevator doors closed. I shut the door, locked it, put the chain on, and leaned against the wood, letting out a long breath. I stopped the recording, saved the audio file, and tucked it away. Then I went to the coffee table and opened the takeout containers. The ribs had cooled, fat congealed white on the meat, the broccoli was wilted, the blueberries were fine, still cold from the store. I didn't eat the food. I put the containers in the fridge, then washed a small bowl of blueberries and ate them on the couch. They were sweet, bursting with juice and a hint of tartness, perking me up a little. I sat there for a long time, watching the streetlights glow through the curtain gap, a thin line of light that slowly moved, stretched, faded, and finally vanished. They knew my new address. I reminded myself to be extra cautious, lock windows and doors, check the hallway before leaving. I still didn't know how far they would go, whether they'd stick to legal pressure or try other means to force me to give up the house. But one thing was certain, they wouldn't stop. They had used the spare key once. Given the chance, they would use it again. And I had to stay one step ahead. On Monday morning of the third week, I received an email from Todd Morgan. It was brief, as always, but the contents made me shoot up from my chair. He wrote that the fingerprint analysis on the spare key was complete. Besides my prints, there was a clear thumbprint on the key recovered from under the doormat. Database comparison matched that print to Kayla Hayes' records at the DMV. Additionally, one of the wiped areas in the accelerant zone had yielded trace skin cells, and preliminary DNA pointed to the same source. They were running a second confirmation, with official report expected by the weekend. I sat clutching the phone, heart pounding, ears ringing. My lips felt dry. I licked them and tasted faint iron. Todd's cautious phrasing, highly consistent, preliminary, second confirmation, still revealed the clear direction. The spare key had Kayla's print, even though she hadn't visited in a year. The wiped area contained DNA matching hers. That was enough, legally, to form a chain impossible to refute, especially with my call recordings, text messages, and lawyers' notarized documents forming a net. I read the email several times, then forwarded it to Clara with a note, preliminary fingerprint and DNA on fire evidence point to Kayla. Official report this weekend. Clara replied almost instantly. Received. Please be cautious, don't share your address on social media, report any anomalies. Hearing materials are fully compiled. I replied okay, then went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. In the mirror, I saw pale skin, dark circles under my eyes. My sleep had been poor, but my eyes were bright, not dull, like a small flame flickering deep in the pupils. I said softly to the reflection, almost there. That afternoon, I had a day off. I walked along the riverside path for a long while. Autumn wind carried a slight chill, dry and gentle, the river glittering with golden light. Maple trees along the path were mostly red, fallen leaves carpeting the ground with a soft crunch. I walked slowly, leaning on the railing now and then to watch the buildings across the river, their windows shining in the afternoon sun. I remembered the time I took Grandma for a walk in her wheelchair. She could still sit up, but couldn't walk far. The wheelchair was rented, its wheels sticky and hard to push. It was autumn too, sunny like today, the warmth on our shoulders. Grandma leaned back, eyes closed, with a look of peace I'd rarely seen. She spoke without opening her eyes. Lila, have you ever thought about finding someone good for you? Don't carry everything alone. I paused, slowing the wheelchair. Haven't thought about it, I admitted. Work keeps me too busy. Busy is busy, but you also need a life. After I'm gone, you'll be alone in that big old house, so empty. A companion would give you someone to talk to. I laughed and said, don't worry about me. I've got too much on my plate. Love can wait. She patted my hand, her warmth through the wheelchair armrest. That image came back to me as I leaned on the railing, watching a white egret skim low over the water, its wingtips almost touching the surface. My nose stung, but I held it in. The autumn breeze swept my hair across my face. I tucked it behind my ear and breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the clean, grassy scent of the river. I was alive. I was standing, breathing, watching the river and the sky. I had evidence, a lawyer, an investigator's trust. What Grandma had left me, I would protect. That evening, I emailed Todd, thanking him and asking for a copy of the final report for my legal proceedings. He replied promptly that he would send it as soon as it was issued. Then I sat at my desk and opened my laptop to compile another document, a detailed timeline, from the day Grandma made her will, to Kayla's visit, to the missing key, to the family's changed attitude after the will's disclosure, to the fire, to the phone calls, to Kayla's visit with the food, every point annotated with evidence references. I knew this record might not be used directly in court, but it served as an anchor for me. Writing it all down, organizing the fragments, they formed a complete picture no one could deny or alter. I wrote late into the night, placing every detail carefully. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the branches, and distant car horns occasionally sounded, but everything felt remote, belonging to another world. At 1 a.m., I saved the file, closed the laptop, and stretched. My back and shoulders ached. I pounded my neck lightly and walked to the window. The night was deep, the street light casting a hazy golden halo over the tree canopy. The path below was empty, save for a stray cat moving slowly past the trash bins, tail high. I drew the curtains, lay back in bed, and closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw that fingerprint image, the distinct ridges and loops, a unique pattern, like a signature that could not be replicated. It was Kayla's signature. She had left an indelible mark at the scene, and she probably had no idea I already had it. I smiled faintly in the dark, turned over, pulled the covers tight, and drifted off. The next 2 weeks brought a strange quiet. Work continued as usual. I wore my crisp blue uniform, moved between rooms, turned patients, administered meds, changed dressings, charted vitals. The condition of the terminally ill patients fluctuated slightly, some improved, others declined, and my charts filled with numbers and notes. The older gentleman with pancreatic cancer remained stable enough to smile weakly now and then, enough to make his wife's eyes glisten for half an hour.